Chapter 9. It took Dan and Gustavo the best part of an hour to find the Bill Butler Park, and then to locate the clearing where Dan had been found. Dan looked around at the trees surrounding him. There was something about the place that reminded him of another meadow, another location, and a small house. Abruptly, he swung on his heels to look in the direction where he thought there should have been a log cabin of sorts. "Oh, you're remembering something, aren't you?" Gustavo said, walking beside Dan. "Yes, but there's something there." Dan pointed to the edge of the clearing. "There was a cabin there, at least I thought there was. And that's where I saw that shepherd, Damianos. But there's no one here." He sounded dismayed, to say the least. "And do you remember falling from somewhere?" Gustavo asked. "No, not really. I only remember hitting my head against a tree trunk." Dan stopped in mid-sentence again, then shouted, "That's it! I hit my head against a tree when I went down the hill. Oh God, it's gone again!" He blurted, shaking his head. "It's maddening. That's what it is, Gustavo, just absolutely insane." "And there's no hill anywhere near here," Gustavo added, hoping to be helpful. "Exactly," Dan agreed. "What I am remembering is a skiing accident. It has nothing to do with this place, and yet this is where the old guy found me. Speaking of the old guy, why don't we have a stroll around that lake, it's called William's Land, by the way, and see if anyone knows who he is? What do you say?" "Okay, let's do that. But whoever he is, even if we happen to meet him, he wouldn't know me and wouldn't be able to add anything." "How could you be so sure he doesn't know you?" "Well, I don't know. You're right. Maybe I came to this park regularly. I really can't remember anything about this place." "Would you rather go back to the shelter then?" No. Since we're here, might as well make the best of it," Dan concluded, walking out of the clearing in the direction of the small lake. "There is not one book here beginning the word victory in the title," Stefano declared, getting to his feet after crawling on all fours along the bookshelves lining the walls of the attic. "Same here," Daniel rejoined. He was on the stepladder, examining the spine of every book on the top shelves, while his mother and sister were looking at the books midway between top and bottom shelves. "And there are books with spines so frayed they're impossible to read," Malou remarked. "I wonder if we should take each of those out and see if it's the right title." "I don't think so, Mum," Gabby said. "This is a rather new problem, so maybe it would be a newer book, I should think." "Why don't we ask Solangi if the book should be a new one? What do you say?" Malou suggested. "Good idea," Stefano agreed. "I'll go down and ask her," he added, already on the ladder leading to the hallway on the second floor of the old house. "Have you found it?" Solangi asked, coming down the corridor to meet him. "No, Miss Solangi, we haven't, but we were wondering if you think it would be a newer book or a very old one." "Why do you ask?" Solangi looked up at the young man. "Your problem is not a new one, yet it's very different to the majority of the goals people have when they come down to revisit their past." "They usually come down together as a family, you mean?" "Yes, Stefano. You see, most people come for a visit when they would like to correct or redress something that happened to them years ago, and although they soon realize changing the past is impossible, they learn valuable lessons while journeying through the years that brought them to their present date." "Okay, if that's the case, we shouldn't have to pull out books that have no illegible spine, is that correct?" "As far as I can tell you, yes, that's correct. Besides, I don't recall that particular book being damaged in any way." "Oh, so you've seen it before, have you?" Stefano asked. "Yes, absolutely. But as I said to your mother once before, my eyesight is not what it used to be, and today I couldn't distinguish one title from the other unless I put my nose to it." "But you are able to read the notepad all right. Why not the books then?" "Because, son, the truth of it is that I can't interfere with your search." "How do you mean?" "You and your family need to find the book, Stefano. That's part of the task. I can only guide you to finding it with solving the riddle, but I can't actually point you to it." "I see. Search and ye shall find, is that it?" "Yes, Stefano, that's exactly what you, your mother and siblings ought to do." Malou, Daniel and Gabby had been listening to this conversation from the opening in the attic. "All right then," Malou said, stepping onto the ladder to come down. "Why don't we go to the den downstairs? I seem to remember it containing quite a few of war books." "What would we want with war books?" Stefano asked, as he helped his mother step off the ladder. "Think about it, Stefano. The title begins with the word victory. When there's a war, there's usually victory, isn't there?" As Daniel reached the last step after Gabby had come down, he said, "I wish we could use a cell phone or a laptop." "And how would those help you?" Malou asked. "The internet, Mum. It would give us a clue about the riddle's message, maybe." Gabby giggled quietly. "I don't think it's a riddle that you'll find on the internet, Daniel. It's very personal." "Yes, dear, you're absolutely correct," Slangy agreed.
Every riddle I have ever seen or deciphered in this house has always been dedicated to the people concerned. Such as in your case, you yourself had noted something that I had not even considered, didn't you?
You mean about regret? Gabby asked.
Yes, my dear.
Slangy looked at her 4 visitors, and before Malou could ask for an explanation, she added,
But let's go down to the den, and I'll let Gabby explain.
Once they were assembled in the den, Slangy sat on the chair facing Damien's old desk, while the 3 children sat on the floor. Malou leaned against one of the shelves.
All right then,
Slangy began.
Stefano, let's see the page of notes.
She stretched a hand for the young man to give her the sheet of paper he had stuck in his pants pocket. He handed it to her. Slangy looked at Gabby.
When we read the last sentence of the riddle, as I remembered it at first, I noted that something was wrong. The sentence read, Victory falls into a lake of joy when memory trespasses time. To me, it should read, a lake of joy and sorrow when memory trespasses time. There's no sorrow in those past memories. That's what's so strange.
And then I said, Gabby interposed, if there is no sorrow and only joy when you remember your past, wouldn't that mean that you have something to regret? And that would mean that Dad must have some regrets in his life, Daniel suggested.
Precisely,
Slangy said.
So even though you'll find the book with the title as we deciphered it, I'm sure you'll need to remember that your father's memories of his past contain something for which he has some regrets.
After walking halfway around the lake, Dan and Gustavo decided to take a seat on one of the stone benches near the edge. This is a beautiful place, isn't it? Gustavo remarked. Yes, except it doesn't inspire me at all, Dan replied, another shadow of discouragement passing over his face. Did you ever visit a lake with your parents? Yeah, with my wife I did. What did you say? Gustavo turned to stare into his friend's face. I don't know, Gustavo. You said you went to a lake with your wife. Was that another of these odd images? Dan shook his head. I suppose it was. These snapshots come and go. And if I said my wife, maybe it was someone else in the car, or maybe I'm seeing someone else entirely. He bowed his head. I just wish someone would tell me what happened to me. Hey man, I'm sure it's going to come back to you, Gustavo said, punching Dan in the arm. You'll see that I'm right. I sure hope so, because right now it feels like I'm in one of those long tunnels, but there's no light at the end and it keeps on veering one way and the other. Oh, but there will be a light at the end of it, I'm sure, an old man said over Dan and Gustavo's shoulders. He was holding a walking cane in a hand striated with the wrinkles of age. His face reflected the joviality of his expression, and his smile was inviting and inspired confidence. I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation, fellows, but I think I recognize you. He rounded the bench to face Dan. I am the person who found you, son. His amused grin didn't abandon his lips. May I sit down? Quite surprised, Dan blurted, Please, sir, by all means. His face suddenly lightening up with renewed hope. He shoved over, so to leave space for the man to sit down, dressed of an elegant summer suit over a white shirt that did everything to enhance the man's natural tan. He took a seat between Dan and Gustavo, putting both hands on the knob of his cane. I'm sure you have many questions to ask regarding the circumstances that led me to find you, don't you? He turned to Dan. Yes, absolutely, but before I ask the obvious, could you tell us your name? Nicholas is the name, son, and yours? I found out only 2 days ago that my name is Dan Politano. And I'm Gustavo, the latter interposed with a broad smile. Yes, I must say, gentlemen, I am very pleased to make your acquaintances. It is not every day that I have the occasion of rescuing, shall we say, someone from an awkward situation. He paused to look into Dan's eyes. But did you say you only found out your name 2 days ago? Yes, I bumped my head when I fell, and the doctor said that I have short-term amnesia. And you came here in the hope to find out what happened to you, is that correct? Dan nodded. And to thank you for calling the ambulance for me. You must have had a concussion, didn't you? Yes, that's right, and I can't remember most things. Dan threw a glance at Gustavo. It's thanks to my friend here that I've been able to piece some of this puzzle together. Well, all I could say is that I, too, would like to shed some light at the end of the tunnel in which you're travelling presently, Mr. Politano. You see, Nicholas is not a name given to me by chance or even by my parents. If you recall your saint's history, Nicholas is the patron saint of sailors, merchants, thieves, and children. Quite an awkward assemblance of personalities, wouldn't you say? You mean you're a saint? Dan asks, astounded by his own inference. Nicholas chuckled heartily. Oh, goodness, no, young man. Far from it, in fact. Let's just say I was given this pseudonym because I happen to love people in general and children in particular, and so many have come across my path that perhaps one of them compared me to him. Gift-giving is my hobby, and I love to see the children's faces when they get their toys from Santa Claus." "Is that where the name Santa Claus comes from, then?" Gustavo asked, apparently interested. "Absolutely, but Nicholas, or Nicholas, actually is the original name of the saint." He turned to Dan again. "And as for you, Dan Politano, I was most pleased to have given you a helping hand when you needed one." "Well, Nicholas, I'm sure happy to have fallen at your feet, so to speak," Dan said, laughing quietly. "But Gustavo and I went to the clearing where you found me, and I couldn't remember a thing." "I see," Nicholas said musingly. "In that case, why don't we go back and perhaps I could explain how I happened to come upon you?" "Of course, if you don't mind, sure," Dan said, already getting up from the bench.